Greetings and salutations. This is Abe Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also help the show out by visiting thebittertruth.info. We've got the show there in addition to YouTube, Spotify, and everything else. Patreon as well. And it's there, though, that you can really help out the show if you want to, other than the Patreon page. Obviously, we're not sponsored, so whatever you want to do, donation, or you want to buy a T-shirt or whatever, it's all there. And any support of the show is greatly appreciated. And yeah, so the holidays are over, and I'm basically kind of getting back on track with the show and my life in general. But I kind of noticed something when I was back in LA visiting. A lot of I saw a lot of folks out there, my friends and everything, my mom, and you get into some heavy conversations around the holidays. Everybody gets a little introspective. But and I started thinking about my own dad, who I haven't spoken to in over 20 years. So this is not going to be some glorious hagiography. But I was talking to a good friend of mine, and it dawned on me that it's a good idea to at least acknowledge the stuff that I learned from the guy, because while he may not have been Father of the Year, I don't think kids come with an owner's manual. He did his best. He's Palestinian. My mother's Brazilian. They came here in the 60s, raised 4 boys, and, bought property and did stuff. But my dad was, not an easy guy. And as we all got older, it got worse. So, probably fill in those details another time. But like I said, this isn't going to be some glory piece of, oh, my dad was so great. But it would be disingenuous, if not outright lying, to say I've learned absolutely nothing from him, especially, given world affairs coming up the way I did in that environment, him being Palestinian and, for a regular working guy, he was pretty active in the Fatah party, which is what he belonged to. And they were much more moderate back then. I'll probably mention that a couple of times. But my first memory of realizing that, aside from my name, my real name is not Abe, it's Brahim, or as the hoi polloi like to say, Ibrahim. But the dialect my dad came from, they never said the I, they would just say Brahim. So, and my last name's obviously Abdelhadi. My mother's Brazilian. Like I said before, she was half Swiss. Her father came to Brazil when he was like 10, met my grandmother, and they had like 14 kids. My dad came from 13 kids. Farmer background, nothing terribly sophisticated, but yet my folks were bright enough to learn 4 languages and, impart, I think, a little bit of wisdom to their sons. But the first time I kind of really realized that I wasn't like from here, even though I get to pass as white. And the interesting thing about that is that, you're always cool until they find out, your background. Then they ask you all these weird ass questions and you're sort of going, yeah, I don't know Osama bin Laden. We must have missed the same holidays. I don't think he did Ramadan with our family, but yeah. So, but I remember having like just being first generation, it just afforded us a unique experience in general. Like I said, my folks met there and, came here in the 60s. And then, and that being said, it was just, we were just sort of a beneficiary of prologue, if you will. I didn't choose it. I was just born into it, as were my cousins, my brothers. And yeah, but before I jump into the story of the Munich Olympics when I was 9, my family was visited by the FBI 3 times. My dad was specifically. We lived in LA County, and back then there was no internet. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. So when something happened, police or, law enforcement would come visit your house if there was a reason to come visit your house. Now they just, put you on a no-fly list and just fuck your life up in general. But back then they used to come visit people and, observe the house and behavior, I guess. My dad was never hauled in for questioning or person of interest or any of that kind of shit. But they, they came, my mom said, because I only remember the Olympics thing. But my mom told me that they would be there for about a half hour or so, 45 minutes. And I remember the Munich Olympics deal, because when they came, my mom, had coffee going, and she offered them coffee, and they drank it with my dad, and just asking him some generic basic questions. Not a little racist. Hey, you're Palestinian. Did you know? But the first time they visited the house was during the 6 Day War, after the 6 Day War, when it was all over. And there was a lot of Palestinian people in LA County. My dad knew a lot of them. Him and his longtime business partner, who was about 20 years older than he was, helped a lot of my cousins and, his cousins and, all that kind of stuff get into the country, and friends, help them get, work visas and get them set up and all that kind of thing. And a lot of them just came and figured it out on their own. But my dad and this other guy, Hussein, his name was Hussein. Oh my God. They helped out a lot of folks, even though I never really got along with Hussein because he was just kind of a right prick. Although I will say this, he did quit smoking at the tender age of 70 and lived to be 98. And it was just a one weird thing where he woke up one morning and felt nauseous and gave away his carton of cigarettes to a neighbor and lived the rest of his life and had just a bad 6 months when he was 98 years old. So there's the non-smoking PSA for you people. But so anyway, Munich, 1972, I was super excited because it was the first time I really knew what the Olympics were. And, if you think it's bad now with all the hoopla and advertising, it was pretty bad back then because we only had 3 networks. So if you're watching one, you had a 33% chance of, being inundated with Olympics stuff. I think it was NBC at that time. But, we were a few days into it, and, and Mark Spitz was this massive swimmer guy out of, I think out of New York State. But at that time, he'd already won like 6 gold medals, and he was on his way to winning like 8 or something. He was like pre-Michael Phelps. And I was excited, like all my friends, but my dad wasn't too happy. And he was not really subtle about him not being happy. If he was like, whatever, he would just say it. And, it was Israel that was entering their first Olympics as a country. They formed in 1947, 48, obviously, if you know the history. 6 Day War happened. They took the West Bank in 67. And now here we are 5 years later. And there were, and Gaza and the Sinai and the Golan Heights, and occupied them. Basically, they didn't take them. They were occupying, and which is a whole nother international law thing. But my dad hated the fact that this colonizing racist project was now being given license. And, he's starting to, he was, young man at that time. I think he was starting to recognize that the reasons he came to this country, aside from, having a better life and making money, the democracy part of it was largely not true. And, you only get as much democracy as the United States is willing to allow you to have. And he had seen, the amount of dictatorships that were going on that were supported by the US and the coups and everything else. My dad was not a stupid person, which is probably why, I got all this crap poured into me at a young age. As we go through some of these stories, which I'm not going to do all today, I'm going to do them kind of one at a time. And I still don't know what to call this, because I don't want to call it Shit My Father Says, because there's already a funny YouTube channel called Shit My Father Says, and I hate ripping off people. Otherwise, I'm Carlos Mencia. But I don't know what I'm going to call it. By the time I'm done with this, I'll figure it out, I guess, but I don't want to be all treacly and sweet and stupid, like Stories of My Father, whatever the fuck that Barack Obama book was. I want to have some teeth, you know what I mean? So you understand that I'm not going to sit there and just, blow the idea of my father. But again, he hated the idea that Israel was just, running around roughshod and doing what the hell they wanted. And I didn't get that. I was 9, and we always had a little bit of a communication issue because when I was a kid, he didn't sound cool to me. I didn't like the way him or my mom talked, to be honest. Now, I was a dopey little kid, playing with my American friends and a lot of my Mexican friends who were trying to be American. A lot of my Mexican friends grew up not speaking Spanish because 60s and 70s, you were shamed into not speaking Spanish. If you went to school and you were speaking Spanish, they would put you in an ESL class until you got up to speed, which was a good thing. But the other thing that was not good is that the way they kind of got you up to speed was, you don't speak Spanish. We're in America. You speak English here. Because God forbid you learn a couple of languages like the average European, if you ever saw the movie Inglourious Bastards, I think the average actor in that film spoke at least 2 languages. Meanwhile, we speak English and bad English and we make a joke of it and we think it's funny and nobody ever wants to learn anything. But so in any case, around September 5th, 6th, the day before my birthday, the whole Black September Munich thing happened. And this was a PLO offshoot that was named after the Hashemite-Palestinian clash, basically where thousands were killed or expelled as the PLO was driven out of Jordan. So these guys, their first, shot of the thing, no pun intended, was to try to kill King Hussein of Jordan. And so the PLO and the Fatah Party really distanced themselves, even though there was obviously some connection, right? So, and if you know the history, I don't like to call, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So, if you were in the Black September group, the chances are very good you had family, direct or, cousins, that were killed or displaced or had their property stolen. Because honestly, that's what happened. The Brits and the Zionist movement, this isn't an anti-Semitic rant. The Zionist movement is not Jewish. If you study the Zionist movement at all, it's largely a secular movement. Many of the participants were atheists and don't really believe in God, but they do believe that, being a Jew is a superior thing. Then where have I heard that before? And I have a lot of friends that went to Hebrew school and were taught this. And they were always taught to, for example, look at the end credits of any movie. You want to see all the Jews. It's how many Jews are in America because we're so smart and we're so this and that. So the Zionist movement is nothing to do necessarily with Judaism. Quick side note, if you've ever read the Olaya Sharem or read about it, it was basically an ersatz white paper compiled by several rabbis, between Haifa and Britain and France, explaining that a secular Israeli project would not be good for the region. And the point they were making was, we've been living here for centuries. We have a good time here. The Arabs don't massacre us. There's no pogroms. That's all Russian and Italians and British and French and Germans. That's who kills Jews. Arabs weren't killing Jews. The Iranians weren't killing Jews. Nobody was killing Jews in the Middle East. And I've met some Zionist people that will insist, well, in 1920, 1920 you had a riot and like 29 Jews were killed. Oops, but maybe that's because you spent 20 years shooting off your mouth to the locals saying that they don't belong here and that they're an inferior race. They're going to get a little pissy, right? So that being said, I get sidetracked. But so the Black September guys, took the Israeli hostages on September 5th of 1972. It was about 6 or 7 days in the Olympics, if I'm not mistaken. Within days after that, it was a real bloody standoff between the German police or the Munich police and the German army because the Black September guys were able to get the survival. They shot 2 Israelis when they raided the dorm right away. And then they took the other guys to a helicopter launch pad. They're supposed to be taken off. I forget to where now. And so the Germans were freaking out because the last thing they want, to sound crude, is a bunch of dead Jews in Germany, because that's not good PR. Just remember 1972, 27 years prior, we just ended a world war with the Germans, who killed a good 6 million Jews and 4 million miscellaneous people. So, their credibility was not that great still. There's a bunch of my neighbors who had fought in World War II. I mean, I'm 58 years old. So I was like I said, 9 in 1972. I had, General Motors retirees and Ford Firestone tire retirees that lived in my neighborhood that were not too happy that we were having the Olympics in Germany. They're like, well, why are we giving these assholes credibility? We just fought a world war with them twice in the same century, right? And of course, there's a lot more background to that, but these guys are vets and they don't really know that. They just know what they've been told. But so it ended up, it was all over. You had the dead athletes, all the Black September guys in that situation were killed. So I was 9 years old. This harshed my buzz a little bit. I didn't understand why the Olympics. I was at that age already going, it's sports. I mean, if you got a problem, take it up with somebody, but leave sports alone or whatever. Although I get it. I get the platform. I'm not a big fan of violence, but I guess when you're violent to people, they're going to respond in kind, hence 9/11, which I know is going to piss off a lot of people just saying that because they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And I get terrorism, but we are the largest purveyor of terrorists or terrorism in the world. And that by that, I mean the United States military. We kill millions of people a year. We support 73% of the world's dictators. So anything remotely resembling democracy is just window dressing. But my dad tried to explain it to me about the Palestinian question and everything. And he's, real simple because I was 9. He was like, well, we live here. What if somebody came and took our house and made us go live in the street? How'd you feel? Well, not very good. And then he would go, okay, well. And like I said, the Fatah party that he belonged to was pretty moderate back then. That was where Yasser Arafat was from. He had probably a good 30 minutes of value. The number one thing being that, he brought the Palestinian issue to the forefront. It became a thing. We know about it now today in 2022 because he started this in 1961. But, and we would go to these Fatah rallies when I was a kid, me and my cousins and my dad's friends. And, they'd have some big dinner, you're paying per plate, it's like any kind of a thing. You're paying to get in, you're paying for a plate. It's all the money goes to the refugees that were stuck in camps, and all of that. So, I'd seen tons of these promo videos and stuff like that, but for the most part, we would get bored. It was at the Wilshire Ebell Theater in Mid Wilshire District in LA. And there was a giant basement there. So we were like 6, 7, 8 years old. We would take down to the basement and go play Spy and all these dopey games and come back up and eat because we could smell the food and then come back and go back down and screw around some more because we were just kind of bored. But, on the drive up and the drive back, my dad was always pumping this stuff into me. And, he wasn't like a fun guy. He wasn't like, hey, let's go we went to Disneyland, but it was always to take, the new relatives that got off the boat, to Disneyland. It wasn't like, hey, kids, let's go to Disneyland. It was always like, hey, Ollie's here and he's never been to Disneyland, so let's go to Disneyland kind of a thing. It was always kind of a matter of fact deal. And he wasn't happy. He wasn't thrilled, about Israeli athletes getting killed. But he knew why, and he knew why they did it. And he was trying to explain that this is going to keep going on as long as there's not a Palestine. And here we are 50 years later, and ta-da, we still have no Palestine, and shit is still happening over there. And the Israelis are just clamping down more, thinking that this is going to work because it's worked so far since 1948. It's just been whiz bang awesome. We're going to exterminate the Arabs. Really? Well, I think Hitler tried to exterminate y'all. So maybe you should come up with a different plan that doesn't sound so Nazi-ish. But so in any case, it was just one of those things where, I was starting to learn the narrative of the Palestinian issue. And because the United States narrative is always, especially the white narrative, and white is a state of mind, by the way, because I know Black people think like this. I know Mexican people who think like this. So it's not like you got to be white to think like this. It's just you're steeped like a cheap bag of tea into the U.S. narrative, the U.S. propaganda machine. And my dad used to say that word all the time, and I fucking hated it when I was little. Didn't get it until I was about 20. The old man was right. Shit, the old man was right, because the narrative is always, so what? So-and-so won. Deal with it. However, people never notice that so-and-so never ever goes away. You ever notice that? When we finally quashed the American Indian, it took like 150 years to finally really just get them under control, lock them up, right? And now they're on reservations. And, we're a joke as far as human rights goes. We're going to sit there and lecture people about human rights. The Native American in this country cannot buy property. I don't know if you knew that. They're on a reservation. Cool. They can rent from the government, but they're on a reservation. The only land they have that we gave them is where they could build a casino, but they can't buy, a liquor store or buy a property or really develop any wealth, which is why you have high unemployment and high alcoholism rates in the Native American community. Yay. So we cut the hair, stole their religion, and made them be Christian. Quick side note, if you've not seen the show Ted Lasso, which I got dragged to kicking and screaming because I did not want to deal with another fucking streaming service. So good friend of mine let me watch it at her house because she has Apple TV. I love that show because it's written really, really well. It's not stupid or sweet or treacly or any of that kind of crap. I use treacly a lot today. But what I love about that show is you're dealing with Premier League soccer. So these guys are from all over the world. They're from Mexico, Nigeria, name it. And so they did like a Christmas episode, which is kind of hilarious because it's streaming. So why would you have a Christmas episode? But they did. And so Ted Lasso asks the Nigerian kid, hey, so when y'all celebrate Christmas, what do y'all do? And he goes, well, when I think about Christmas, I think about colonialism. So Christmas has a different meaning for me than it does for you. And Ted Lasso goes, oh, duly noted. Kind of, dumbass me kind of a thing. What I loved about that was they didn't make up some stupid Kwanzaa thing. Oh, well, in Nigeria, we celebrate. No, they probably don't, unless some of them are Catholic, right? It's not a national thing like it is here, right? So I really enjoyed that they sort of put it in everyone's face. Yeah, other countries don't have that view of us. We do, the Christmas is the world over. Yeah, because Europe and then the United States just colonize the shit out of everything, make it part of the empire. And so now guess what? A lot of these places celebrate Christmas. But yeah, so I really was starting to get an idea of who I was. I mean, the kids knew who I was. They knew my parents. I grew up in the same neighborhood for 18 years. So we all went to the same elementary and junior high and high school. By the time I got to high school, it was pretty cooled out, but junior high and high school were a little tough. And only because, they know who you are. It's not like, they could spot me. I don't look the part, but, first day of school, roll call, my name came up, they all knew me. They all been, not all, but, a lot of my friends been in my house, they hate the weird food. They liked it, but they called it weird. And I just couldn't accept the American exceptionalism that was already, that was already beaten into me, that's what it was. I just wanted to be normal. I mean, when I was little, up until I was about the age of 6, and this is, one of those dark secrets I hate telling anybody, but it's embarrassing, but it's just funny. And it serves this purpose here. When I was little, I didn't like my name at all. So I wanted to change it to Donnie Osmond. And my dad is like, first of all, I'm named after my grandfather who fought in World War I. He fought with the British against the Turks, that whole Lawrence of Arabia thing, only to find out that they'd been had. But, he served 6 months, not served, but he did 6 months in a Turkish prison before he escaped. And he had to walk back to Palestine. It took him 6 months to do it. Him and another guy, were able to get out of Turkish prison. And this is World War I. So this is pre-Amnesty International. There's no Doctors Without Borders. There's none of that shit. He's just in a Turkish prison for all that we think a Turkish prison could be. I don't know what happened to my grandfather. I don't want to know what happened to my grandfather. I can't imagine it was a good experience. Hence why bother escaping. Probably wasn't like a prison in Norway. But all of that to say, though, that I really didn't want, or I didn't really understand that I was being propagandized, right? As a kid. We're still in the middle of Vietnam. It was maybe a couple of years away from being over. This was 72. Yeah. So 75 was when it was finally over. But moving forward in my life, that little lesson and listening to my dad explain the Palestine-Israel thing, at the time, like I said, I didn't get it. But this thankfully wasn't the only, lesson or whatever, because you're going to be faced with a lot of other stuff. And that's kind of going to try and make a little series out of this. Everyone's got a story, right? Everyone's got a story. And I don't care if you talk to your parents, don't talk to your parents. Your parents are the most milquetoast, weird white people ever that never wanted to, know about anything negative. They at least, they taught you something, and so I ended up with this crazy, unique background. And this was one of the first lessons, waking up, as it were. And it wasn't like I became some, radical, at 9. But it was the first time I was starting to realize that, that sinking feeling that I was different because I was, because we were different. My folks were different. Our relatives were different. I played with the other kids. They came over to the house, and they loved my mom's cooking. They'd lick the plate clean and all of that kind of stuff. And but sometimes there's some treachery there. Some kids would like kids do, kind of stand by me kind of shit. They turn on you, and at least when you least expect it, you're playing street football, and all of a sudden you try to call a penalty, and now it's you fucking camel jockey, or you're a sand nigger because you're trying to call an offsides. But yeah. So I guess, I don't know. I guess the idea is that all normal meant really was to sort of, live in denial. And, you know, I get Americans get really good at that. I got really good at that. It wasn't until I was probably tail end of high school and getting into college. And this was conflicting, because my other dark story was when I was 13, I got born again behind my parents' back. Neither one of them talked to me about it. My mom and dad had this weird deal, which I'll explain another time. So I got born again on my own and was sneaking around, and, was like living in an Eastern Bloc country. I couldn't get caught with the Bible kind of thing. And I did that to probably 22 or so, 23. And that will be for a later time, but from when I actually went to the West Bank. But another lesson I learned from my dad. But yeah, it was just like that whole born again thing was conflicting with what I thought was a responsibility to humanity, right? And I remember one of the last churches I was attending, I was around 19 years old. I started suffering the death of 1,000 paper cuts, right? You don't just one day go, I don't believe this shit anymore, but you start asking questions, and one by one, they don't get answered. And you keep getting told to have faith, right? Well, faith isn't fact. And by my mid-20s, I really learned how to say fuck faith, because it's not fact. Okay. You can believe it if you want to, but we don't legislate on it, and we don't decimate an entire civilization or a whole, group of people, like wholesale bombing Cambodia because America, right? Same thing. And I remember having this one pastor specifically saying how the Palestinians, this was right after Sabra and Shatila happened in 1982. And if you've ever heard me interview Miko Palet, we've talked about it a couple of times briefly in his shows, because we were trying to cover another topic, but he's going to probably come on in the next few months here. And because I want to talk to him, and I've talked to him off mic about this, I'd like to have you come on and talk about your origin story, which is kind of what I'm doing here, I guess. Because he had a come to Jesus moment, no pun intended, as an Israeli soldier in 1982. At the time I was 19, he was about 20 or 21. He'd been in the army for a while. And he had his big moment when he realized that Sabra and Shatila was not just an exercise that they were just going, a couple of miles over into the Lebanon border to just do some drills. They were now pushing 40 miles into Lebanon, with air cover. And then, 4,500 refugees in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in South Lebanon were slaughtered by the Lebanese Christian militia. Not that that's an oxymoron, with the skies being lit by the Israelis with flares and all kinds of shit. And, they like to delineate it that way, but it's not like the Israelis didn't kill people either. And so Miko, that was it. I mean, he was already, his old man had been a pacifist after being a much decorated general. His nickname was Abu Mazen, which was, father of peace, right? The Arabs called him that. Palestinians called him that. Here's an Israeli guy who was a general who, after the 6-day war, was like, this is bullshit. And, I'll let that story for Miko to tell, but just to give you an idea. But yeah, so everybody's got this. And so moving forward, it wasn't until I probably got to the tail end of high school, like I said, into college, and I had a couple of, radical political science professors. They weren't burning anything or anything crazy. They were just what they were saying in class. I think they would get canceled today for what they were telling me in class. And, they started up some arguments because there's some super right-wing kids in my school, well, you don't like it, then go live somewhere else, which is, we have to be the stupidest fucking electorate in the history of ever. Nobody ever asks why, right? If you say, hey, the Norwegians do it like this, and look what they have, their mental health is, a lot better than ours per capita, blah, blah, blah. Well, fuck it. You want to live there then? No. How about we do it here? Because we're supposed to be the richest country on earth and the greatest nation in the world, which is absolute horseshit, because we're not. We fail on every fucking metric in the industrialized world, period, hands down. That is it. The only thing we are good at is we're number one in self-esteem. We really teach our kids to love themselves here. And with nothing to fucking love. You suck at math. You don't know what gravity is. But yay, I like myself. I'm a good person. I'm going to wrap this up before it gets much more ranty than I would like it to be. But yeah, so that's basically it. Again, these are things I learned from my dad. Like I said, I think he tried. Sadly, we don't speak anymore for a lot of reasons. and most of them are good. But it'd be a lie to say I didn't learn anything from them. And I think part of this, in my mind anyway, is anybody that knows me knows that when my dad comes up, it's not terribly favorable, and I don't spend a lot of time on it. It's one of those things. I think when he passes away, I probably won't tell too many people. I'll just be sort of like, okay, well, wish it was better. I'm not gonna put it on Facebook or have anybody pray for me. He wasn't that kind of guy, so it just was what it was. But I understand the blood in my veins, and later I'll probably be discussing how I went through my not cool with the Palestinians phase right around the time me and my dad had our big falling out. And it took me a minute to realize that I can't, cry a river for the Bolivians or Venezuela or Libya, or what we're doing in all of the stand countries without, counting the Palestinians in that mix. In fact, they are probably right now the most fucked people beyond what's happening in Yemen, which again is another U.S. backed debacle. The Gaza Strip is about the size of Austin, Texas, and it is an open air prison. When the Israelis pulled Jewish settlers, out of there in 2005, I beg your pardon, I have to take a sip of whiskey and soda. So if that bothers you, when they pulled out Jewish settlers in 2005, everyone thought, oh, see, progress. But the reason they pulled Jewish settlers out of the Gaza Strip was because they're going to start ritualistically carpet bombing, or as Benny Gantz used to like to say, mowing the lawn. And what we've done, and I say we because they're U.S. weapons, U.S. bombs, and we give them $4 billion a year to buy such bombs. In fact, we gave them another $1 billion early last year because they had wasted their bombs in Gaza, and so they wanted to replenish what they had lost, and so we gave them another $1 billion worth of weapons. And people go, oh no, they paid for it. Well, we have the big $4 billion voucher that we give them for them to buy weapons. So it's not their money. It's just a voucher we give them to cash in to buy weapons, which is interesting because they sell weapons too. Namely to the Ukraine in 2014, when Hillary and Obama backed a neo-Nazi-led coup in the Ukraine because we're assholes. And we had the Israelis sell neo-Nazis weapons to fuck with the Russians. There's a sense of irony in there. Again, I'm going to start wrapping this up in a second because I can tell I'm getting tangential. But no, that's the thing is you can't. I could not, in good conscience, look at all these other world issues and not count the Palestinians in that. They are not allowed to rebuild. They're still sanctioned by the Israelis, and no one is allowed to give them supplies. Hamas, who is the governing body there, are able to get some things from Iran. And then people like to say, see, they're supporting terror. If we're going to do a double check, Iran's not bombing anybody. The Israelis regularly bomb parts of Lebanon. They bomb Syria. They bomb parts of Iran. And yet Iran, who could go into a war short of nukes because Israel has 500 nuclear weapons, they don't. They practice amazing restraint. And I'm not going to sit there and say that the Iranian government is perfect. But they seem to run a lot more mature than the United States. And they certainly run a lot more mature than Saudi Arabia and fucking Israel, who are our allies for democracy in the Middle East. So that's it. I hope it wasn't too ranty. Hope you got the point of this. Plan on doing more of these because there's a lot of little slivers and chapters that I think are interesting, especially to the average American who does not understand the Palestinian issue at all remotely. I got some neoliberal chewy blue friends here in Austin, Texas, who like to say, "Oh, it's just about a religion. I'm a sophisticated atheist. They just need to get rid of the religion." All right, well, it's not a little racist because the Israelis believe that anybody that's not Jewish shouldn't be living in Israel. So they still have 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel, or as they like to say, the Arab Israelis, which sounds kind of smoother. But they don't get equal rights to the regular Israeli citizens, not even remotely. They have a separate ID card, 2 separate ID cards, in fact. Their utilities are curtailed on the regular, where if there's a problem in Gaza or the West Bank, they get their water shut off and they live in Israel. They have to have these giant water tanks on top of their houses to catch the rain, so that when the Israelis shut off their water, they have water. They'll go hours without electricity. Meanwhile, the Jews across the street, they got electricity, no problem. So it's a fundamentally apartheid, fascist, racist construct. And this is not to say Judaism is bad. It's not an anti-Semitic thing. It's an observation, kind of like we made up shit about Saddam Hussein and hung him for an awful lot less than what our presidents and their cabinets and our Senate and our Congress routinely do. So I hope that wasn't too much of a mouthful to get at the end. Again, thebittertruth.info. Appreciate the support. Going to be interviewing some folks in the next few weeks here. Going to be getting into the Russian-Ukraine thing with Adrian Botaretto. He's going to come on and get into some more detail on that. I'm tired of doing some of these by myself, although I kind of enjoy it because I don't have to keep scheduling people. But anyway, as always, as this stuff I can't even talk today. 11 benevolent elephants. I keep doing that and I still slur my words. If this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.